The Starlight. Charity Gala wasn't just an event. It was a universe of power, wealth, and ambition, condensed into a single, glittering ballroom. At its center was Arthur Parker, a man whose net worth could alter the fate of nations. But in the space of a single heartbeat, all that power meant nothing. As champagne flowed and billion-dollar deals were whispered, the unthinkable happened. A gasp rippled through the crowd as the titan of industry collapsed. Cameras flashed, security surged forward, but everyone was frozen. Everyone except for the one person nobody noticed, a waitress named Isabelle. What she did next didn't just save a life, it shattered a dynasty and exposed a secret buried for 25 years. The air in the grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria was thick with the scent of money, an intoxicating perfume of rare orchids, expensive cologne, and the subtle metallic tang of ambition. Chandeliers dripping with thousands of crystals cast a fractured, dreamlike glow on the assembled pantheon of New York's elite. This was the annual Starlight Charity Gala, an evening where the city's most powerful people gathered to publicly display their generosity, while privately cementing the deals that kept their empires turning. At the gravitational center of this universe was Arthur Parker. At 65, he had the sharp, predatory profile of an eagle with eyes the color of a winter sky that missed nothing. His company, Parker Innovations, was a behemoth, its tentacles wrapped around everything from global logistics to cutting-edge biotech. He moved through the crowd with an economy of motion that bespoke absolute confidence. A nod here, a firm handshake there, each gesture was a transaction, a reaffirmation of his place at the apex of the food chain. Yet behind the formidable facade, a deep weariness had settled into his bones. The smiles he received were reflections of his balance sheet. The laughter was tuned to the pitch of his stock price. It was a gilded hodge, and he was its most prized and most isolated occupant. His gaze drifted past the fawning socialites and landed on his corporate nemesis, Donovan Reed. Reed was 30 years his junior, a Silicon Valley upstart who'd made his fortune in disruptive tech and carried himself with the smug swagger of a man who believed he was inventing the future. "Arthur, you old dinosaur." Reed said, his voice a smooth, condescending purr as he intercepted him near the silent auction. "Good to see they still let you out past sundown. I was just admiring the bid Parker Innovations put on the children's hospital wing. A bit conservative, don't you think?" Arthur's smile was thin and cold. "Generosity isn't a competition, Donovan. It's a responsibility. A concept your generation seems to have replaced with brand synergy." The veiled insult hit its mark. Reed's smile tightened. "Times change, Arthur. Adapt or become a fossil. My company just secured the patent on the neural interface tech your R&D department has been chasing for 5 years. The future doesn't wait for responsibility." The barb was sharper than Arthur had expected, a direct hit to his professional pride. A familiar, tight sensation bloomed in his chest, a dull ache he'd grown accustomed to ignoring. He'd been warned by his private physician, Dr. Matthews, about stress. "Your heart is a precision machine, Arthur," the doctor had said, "but it's been running at maximum output for 40 years. Even legends need to rest." Rest was a luxury he couldn't afford. He turned away from Reed, needing a moment to compose himself. The tightness was spreading, a cold pressure radiating down his left arm. He dismissed it as indigestion, a consequence of foregoing lunch for a brutal quarterly review. Meanwhile, weaving through the labyrinth of tables with a tray of champagne flutes was Isabelle Rossy. To the guests, she was invisible, a functional part of the scenery in her crisp black and white uniform. But to Izzy, this room was a world away from her reality. At 26, her life was a cramped apartment in Queens, a mountain of debt, and the ever-present cloying smell of antiseptic from the hospice where her mother, Sophia, was slowly fading. Izzy was supposed to be in her 3rd year of medical school. She had been at the top of her class, a natural with a gift for diagnosis and a calming bedside manner. But then her mother's multiple sclerosis had taken a devastating turn. A promising experimental treatment. One she had poured all her hopes and savings into, had backfired horribly, accelerating the disease's progression. School became an impossible luxury. Waitressing at high-end events like this paid the bills barely. Her mind was a split screen. One half focused on the immediate task, keep the glasses full, avoid collisions, remain unnoticed. The other half was a running commentary of medical observation. She saw the forced smiles and noted the dilated pupils of a guest who'd had too much to drink. She clocked the slight tremor in an elderly woman's hand, a possible sign of early-onset Parkinson's. She saw the flushed face and sheen of sweat on Donovan Reed, likely from a combination of arrogance and alcohol. And then she saw Arthur Parker. He was standing alone, his back to the crowd, one hand gripping the velvet rope of a stanchion. She noticed his pallor first. Under the warm ballroom lights, his skin was ashen, almost grey. She saw the subtle tension in his jaw, the way his knuckles were white where he gripped the rope. While everyone else saw a titan in a moment of repose, Izzy saw a textbook collection of symptoms. Diaphoresis. A possible grimace of pain masked as a frown. The way he was subtly leaning his weight onto the post. Her training, buried but not forgotten, screamed at her. Acute myocardial infarction. Angina pectoris. She hesitated. What could she do? She was a cater waitress. Approaching a man like Arthur Parker would get her fired instantly. Her manager, a stern woman named Francine, had been clear. You are ghosts. You see nothing. You hear nothing, you say nothing. You just serve. But the image of her mother, frail and helpless in her hospice bed, flashed in her mind. She had been helpless to stop the disease that ravaged her. She couldn't stand by and be helpless again. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she placed her tray on a nearby serving stand and began to move toward him, a small, determined figure cutting a path through a sea of oblivious power. Every instinct, every fiber of her being told her that something was about to go terribly, horribly wrong. The world for Arthur Parker was narrowing to a pinpoint. The vibrant cacophony of the gala, the music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, faded into a dull, distant roar, like the sound of the ocean heard through a seashell. The tightness in his chest was no longer a dull ache. It was a crushing weight, an invisible vice, squeezing the life from him. His meticulously tailored tuxedo suddenly felt like a straitjacket. The pain wasn't just in his chest anymore. It was a searing fire shooting down his arm and into his jaw. He tried to take a breath, but his lungs wouldn't cooperate. Black spots danced in his vision, eclipsing the glittering chandeliers. He saw Donovan Reed across the room laughing, and the sight filled him with a sudden, impotent rage. He would not die here. Not in front of him. Not in front of any of them. He tried to push himself upright to regain control, but his body betrayed him. His legs gave way, and the velvet rope slipped from his grasp. The sound that followed was not the dignified thud of a man fainting. It was a sickening final crash. Arthur Parker, the unbreakable titan, hit the polished marble floor with the full weight of his unconscious body. A nearby table was jostled, and a crystal flute of champagne shattered the sound, cutting through the din like a gunshot. For a full 3 seconds, the room was suspended in disbelief. Then chaos erupted. A collective gup swept through the ballroom. People surged forward, a morbidly curious wave of silk and diamonds. Phones were instantly raised, their screens glowing like malevolent eyes, capturing the downfall of a king. "Someone do something," a woman shrieked. "Call 911, another voice yelled, though no one seemed to be moving to do so. Donovan Reed stood frozen, his smug expression replaced by a mask of pale shock. Security guards, large men, trained to handle external threats, pushed through the crowd, but they were utterly unprepared for a medical emergency of this magnitude. They formed a protective but useless circle around their fallen client. "Give him some air." "Is he breathing?" The questions were frantic, useless. The circle of onlookers was a wall of panic and morbid fascination. But Isabelle Rossy wasn't watching. She was moving. The moment Arthur collapsed, her hesitation evaporated, replaced by a cold, clear focus. The ballroom, the guests, her job, it all vanished. There was only the man on the floor and the ticking clock. "Out of my way! Please let me through," she yelled, her voice cutting through the panic with an authority that surprised even herself. The crowd, startled by this uniformed girl who dared to command them, parted instinctively. She dropped to her knees beside Arthur, the expensive fabric of her uniform scraping against the hard marble. The years of studying, the late nights poring over medical textbooks, the hours in simulation labs, it all came rushing back. Her fingers went straight to his carotid artery. She held her breath, counting. 1, 2, 3. Nothing. No pulse. Her eyes flickered to his chest. It wasn't moving. Cardiac arrest. He's not breathing. "His heart has stopped," she announced, her voice steady and loud. "I need an AED. Does this venue have an automated external defibrillator?" She looked up at the stunned security guards. It's a red or white box on the wall. It should be marked, "Find it now." One of the guards, a burly man named Dave, snapped out of his stupor and began barking into his radio. The other looked at Izzy, bewildered. "Who are you? That doesn't matter right now." She shot back, her hands already moving to Arthur's chest. She ripped open his starched white shirt buttons, flying across the floor. She interlocked her fingers, placed the heel of her hand on his sternum, and began compressions. 1 and 2. And 3 and 4. She counted aloud, her voice, a metronome, in the chaotic silence that had fallen over the room. The rhythm was perfect, the depth exact. It was brutal physical work. Her arms, conditioned by carrying heavy trays, were strong, but the force required was immense. She could feel the faint, sickening give of his ribs, a necessary evil she'd been trained for. The crowd watched in stunned fascination. This waitress, this nobody, was pounding on the chest of one of the most powerful men in the world, her face a mask of intense concentration, her brow beaded with sweat. Donovan Reed looked on his face a mixture of horror and something else, a flicker of professional calculation. An event like this, it would tank Parker's stock price. Here, the guard. Dave skidded to a halt beside her, thrusting the red AED box into her hands. Izzy didn't miss a beat. She tore open the box, pulling out the pads. Her movements were swift and efficient. She followed the diagram, placing one pad on his upper right chest and the other on his lower left side. "Everyone stand back," she commanded. The machine's automated voice began to speak cold and robotic. Analyzing heart rhythm. Do not touch the patient. The seconds stretched into an eternity. The entire ballroom held its breath. Izzy's gaze was locked on Arthur's still face. For a fleeting moment, she saw not a billionaire, but a fragile human being, his life hanging by the thinnest of threads. She saw the lines of stress etched around his eyes, the vulnerability he kept so carefully hidden from the world. Shock advised. Charging. Stand clear. A high-pitched whine filled the air. Clear! Izzy yelled, her hands hovering inches above his body. The machine delivered the shock. Arthur's body arched violently off the floor, a single spastic convulsion before falling limp again. Izzy's fingers were immediately back on his neck. Still nothing. No pulse. Resuming compressions, she stated, her voice tight with strain. She began the rhythmic pumping again, her own heart hammering against her ribs, her muscles screaming in protest. The world had shrunk to this single desperate task. The man on the floor, the cold marble beneath her knees, the frantic beat she was trying to force back into his silent heart. She would not let him die. Just as she was about to begin another cycle, she heard the wail of sirens growing louder outside. The paramedics were coming, but she knew that for Arthur Parker, these minutes, the ones she was fighting for, were the only ones that mattered. The arrival of the paramedics was a blur of professional efficiency. They swarmed the scene, their movements sharp, and practiced a stark contrast to the gawking paralysis of the gala's attendees. Izzy, exhausted and trembling with adrenaline, relinquished her position, giving a concise clinical report. Male mid-60s. Witnessed collapse. No pulse, no respiration upon initial assessment. One shock delivered by AED, no change. Approximately 6 minutes of continuous CPR. The lead paramedic, a woman with tired eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, gave Izzy a quick, appreciative nod. Good work. You may have just saved his life. As they loaded Arthur onto a gurney, his face now covered with an oxygen mask, the bubble of clinical focus that had protected Izzy finally burst. The noise of the ballroom rushed back in the frantic murmuring, the insistent clicking of phone cameras. She was suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance. Her hair stuck to her sweaty forehead, her uniform stained, and a small smear of Arthur's blood on her cheek from a button that had scratched him. Her manager, Francine, descended upon her like a hawk. "What do you think you were doing?" she hissed, her face pinched with fury. "You assaulted a guest. You ruined a $10,000 tuxedo. You are fired, Rossy. Get your things and get out." "I was saving his life," Izzy said, her voice barely a whisper. The injustice of the words, a fresh wave of shock. Before she could argue further, she was engulfed by a swarm of reporters who had bypassed security in the chaos. Microphones were shoved in her face. "What's your name? Did you know Mr. Parker? Are you a nurse?" The questions were a dizzying assault. Panicked Izzy pushed through the throng, muttering, "I have to go," and fled through a service corridor, her heart pounding a painful rhythm against her ribs. She didn't stop until she was outside in the cool night air, the wail of the ambulance fading in the distance. Fired. She had been fired for saving a man's life. The absurdity of it was almost laughable. The next 24 hours were a surreal nightmare. Her face was everywhere. Grainy cell phone videos of her performing CPR were on every news channel, every social media feed. She was dubbed the Angel of the Gala. The media, unable to find her, camped outside her small Queen's apartment building, turning her life into a spectacle. She stayed inside, blinds drawn, her phone turned off, feeling like a fugitive. On the second day, there was a sharp, persistent knock on her door. Peeking through the peephole, she saw a man in an impeccably tailored conservative suit. He looked more like a funeral director than a reporter. Cautiously, she opened the door a crack. "Miss Isabelle Rossy?" he asked. His voice was calm and measured. "My name is Benjamin Carter. I am Mr. Parker's personal attorney and friend. May I have a moment of your time?" Reluctantly, she let him in. Her tiny apartment with its second-hand furniture and stacks of medical textbooks felt claustrophobic in the presence of his expensive, quiet authority. "Mr. Parker is alive?" "Miss Rossy." Benjamin began, his expression grave. "He is in intensive care at Lenox Hill Hospital, but the doctors are unequivocal. Had it not been for your immediate and expert intervention, he would not have survived. The brain damage would have been irreversible within 4 to 5 minutes. You gave him that time." A wave of relief so profound it made her dizzy washed over Izzy. I'm so glad to hear that. Arthur Mr. Parker has no living immediate family, and he is not a man who accepts debts lightly. He has instructed me from his hospital bed to express his gratitude. He has authorized me to offer you a token of his appreciation." Benjamin slid a sleek leather folder onto her coffee table. Izzy stared at it, her heart sinking. She knew what this was. Hush money, a reward to make the story go away, to neatly tie up the loose ends of his public near-death experience. He is prepared to pay off your student loans in their entirety. Benjamin continued, his voice neutral. "And he has established a trust fund in your name. The initial principal is $2 million. Izzy stared at the man, speechless. $2 million. The number was abstract, meaningless. It was a sum that could solve every problem in her life. It could pay for her mother's hospice care 10 times over. It could put her back in medical school without a single worry. It could give her a life she couldn't even imagine. But as she looked at the folder, a cold, sickening feeling began to curdle in her stomach. It was the name of Arthur's company that triggered it. Parker Innovations. For the past year, she had obsessed over every scrap of information about the experimental drug trial her mother had participated in. It was a last-ditch effort, a new biologic agent designed to halt the progression of MS. But for a small, tragic subset of patients, including her mother, it had caused a catastrophic autoimmune response. She knew the name of the small, agile biotech firm that had developed it, Billionaire Labs, and she knew from a footnote in a devastating financial report she had read late one night that Billionaire Labs had been quietly acquired 2 years ago, bought out and absorbed its research and liabilities, now belonging to a much larger entity. She looked Benjamin Carter straight in the eye, her voice trembling slightly. Parker Innovations. She said the name tasting like ash in her mouth. Did they acquire a company called Billionaire Labs about 2 years ago? Benjamin's professional mask flickered. A hint of surprise or perhaps recognition crossed his features. He was a lawyer. He knew how to conceal his thoughts, but for a fraction of a second he was transparent. Yes, he admitted, his voice cautious. It was a minor acquisition part of our biotech portfolio expansion. Izzy felt the floor drop out from beneath her. The man she had saved. The man now offering her a fortune, a new life. He was the owner of the company, the very entity whose failed drug had destroyed what was left of her mother's health. The money on the table wasn't a reward. It was blood money. A cosmic, cruel joke delivered in a leather folder. She pushed the folder back across the table. "No," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of grief and rage. "I can't accept this." Benjamin Carter stared at her, genuinely perplexed for the first time. He had expected tears of gratitude, ecstatic acceptance. He had not expected this. "Miss Rossy, I don't think you understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," she interrupted, standing up, her small frame radiating a sudden fierce energy. "You can tell Mr. Parker that his money is not wanted here. You tell him I don't take payment from the man who ruined my mother's life." The sterile scent of the hospice was the smell of Izzy's life. It clung to her clothes, her hair, her memory. After a sleepless night, wrestling with the revelation about Parker Innovations, she found herself by her mother's bedside, the multi-million-dollar offer, feeling like a phantom limb, an extension of her life that was both there and not there, and a source of constant aching pain. Sophia Rossy was a shadow of the vibrant woman who had raised Izzy alone, a woman who loved to dance and filled their tiny apartment with the aroma of garlic and basil. Now she was frail, her body curled under the thin white blanket, her breathing a shallow rhythmic whisper. The MS had stolen her mobility years ago, but the failed drug trial from Waitress Labs had stolen her mind, leaving her adrift in a fog of confusion with only fleeting moments of lucidity. Izzy held her mother's cool, papery hand. "Hi, Mama," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "It's me. It's Izzy." Sophia's eyes, a pale, cloudy blue, flickered open. For a moment, there was a spark of recognition, a faint smile gracing her lips. "My Isabella, my little doctor." The words were a knife in Izzy's heart. Not yet Mama, but soon. It was a lie she told herself as much as her mother. "There was a man," Sophia murmured, her voice distant, her thoughts drifting like sap. "He smelled of the sea and leather. A long time ago." Izzy squeezed her hand, trying to ground her. This was a new fragment of memory, something she'd never mentioned before. But just as quickly as it appeared, the moment of clarity was gone. Sophia's eyes unfocused, and she slipped back into the quiet, inaccessible world she now inhabited. Izzy sat there for hours, the conflict raging within her. The $2 million. It was an obscene amount of money, but it was also the key. It meant the best care for her mother. A private room, round-the-clock specialists who might be able to offer some comfort, some small improvement. It meant a future for herself, a return to the path she had been forced to abandon. She could become a doctor and dedicate her life to preventing what happened to her mother from happening to anyone else. But at what cost? Accepting the money felt like a betrayal. It felt like absolving Arthur Parker of his company's sin, like putting a price tag on her mother's suffering. It was a devil's bargain, and either choice led to a different kind of damnation. Meanwhile, across town, in a sterile white hospital room, the gears of the Parker empire were grinding. Arthur was awake, tethered to a web of monitors and IV drips. His near-death experience had stripped him of his usual armor, leaving him looking older, more vulnerable. Beside his bed stood not a concerned relative, but his sharp-witted nephew, Carter Parker. Carter was the vice president of Parker Innovations, a position he'd earned more through bloodline than merit. He had his uncle's ambition, but none of his vision or grit. He saw Arthur's sudden mortality not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. The board is concerned." Uncle Arthur Carter said, his voice laced with a synthetic sympathy. The stock took a 17% hit after the news broke. The investors are spooked. They see weakness. Arthur's gaze was cold. The stock will recover. It always does. Worry about the Q4 projections, not the gossip. It's more than gossip. Carter pressed a little too eagerly. This waitress, this Isabelle Rossy, the media is painting her as a working-class saint, and you as... Well, the story needs to be managed. Benjamin told me you offered her a ridiculous sum of money, and she refused. Arthur's silence was his confirmation. See, it makes you look weak, guilty even. Carter continued. We need to control this narrative. My PR team has a plan. We bring her in, give her a token position in the company's charitable foundation, parade her around at a press conference. We turn her into a Parker Innovations success story. Your hero now a part of the family. It's perfect. Arthur's eyes narrowed. She is not a PR problem to be managed, Carter. She's the woman who saved my life. You will leave her alone. The command was absolute, but Carter was already calculating. His uncle was weak, sentimental. If he couldn't control the waitress, perhaps he could discredit her. Dig up some dirt, leak a story that she was an opportunist. He would not let some no-name girl from Queens interfere with his ascent to the throne. The pressure on Izzy was mounting from another direction, too. A sleek black car had been parked outside her building for a day. Finally, the passenger emerged Donovan Reed. He caught her as she was leaving to pick up groceries, his smile as polished and predatory as ever. Isabelle Rossy, he said, extending a hand. Donovan Reed. I was there, at the gala. What you did was truly remarkable. Izzy eyed him with suspicion. Thank you. Look, I'll be direct, Reed said, getting straight to the point. I know who Arthur Parker is. He'll try to buy your silence, bury you in gratitude so he can control the story. I have a different offer. My company, Reed Dynamics, is launching a new medical technology initiative. We're looking for a public face for our outreach program. Someone with real-world experience, someone authentic, someone like you. We'd match Parker's offer, put you through medical school, and give you a platform to actually make a difference. Izzy stared at him. It was the same offer wrapped in a different package. She was no longer a person. She was a commodity, a symbol to be bought and sold by powerful men. First Parker, then Carter's Machiavellian PR schemes, and now Reed's transparent attempt to use her as a weapon against his rival. She was trapped a pawn in a game played by kings. The weight of her mother's illness, the crushing burden of her principles, and the relentless pressure from a world that had suddenly discovered her were becoming unbearable. Standing on a cracked sidewalk in Queens, she felt the walls closing in. She had to do something. She couldn't run, and she wouldn't be bought. There was only one path left. She had to face the man at the center of the storm. The VIP wing of Lenox Hill Hospital was another world. It was hushed and carpeted with soft lighting and tastefully abstract art on the walls. It felt more like a luxury hotel than a place of healing. For Izzy, dressed in simple jeans and a worn sweater, it felt like crossing into enemy territory. She had refused Benjamin Carter's calls, ignored Donovan Reed's messages, and dodged the press. She had come here on her own terms. She gave her name at the nurse's station, and the reaction was immediate. A senior nurse with a practiced, calm demeanor appeared. Miss Rossy, Parker has given instructions. Please come with me. Arthur Parker's room was a corner suite with a panoramic view of the city he had conquered. But the man in the bed looked anything but triumphant. The web of wires was still there, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, a constant reminder of his fragility. He was sitting up a tray of untouched food beside him. When he saw Izzy, his pale blue eyes, so formidable at the gala, held a different expression, weary, guarded, and surprisingly curious. "Miss Rossy," he said, his voice raspy but firm. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." Izzy remained standing near the door. "I'm not here to thank you, Mr. Parker, and I'm not here for your money." Arthur inclined his head slightly. "Benjamin informed me. He also informed me of the reason you gave. Billionaire Labs." He said the name without flinching, but Izzy saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a deep, ancient pain. "My mother was in their trial for a drug called NV34. Izzy said, her voice low and steady, fueled by a righteous anger she had been suppressing for a year. She was one of the success stories at first, and then the side effects began. It didn't just fail to help her, it attacked her system. It accelerated her decline. The doctors called it a catastrophic cascade. Your company bought them. You bought their research, their patents, and their failures. So when you offer me $2 million, it feels like you're trying to put a price on what your company took from her. From me." Arthur listened to every word, his expression unreadable. The beeping of the monitor remained steady, a counterpoint to the emotional storm in the room. When she finished, a long silence stretched between them. "I was not aware of the specifics of the NV34 trial," he said finally, his voice heavy. "The acquisition was one of dozens, a line item on a spreadsheet vetted by my people. That is not an excuse. It is a failing on my part. The responsibility is mine." The simple direct admission caught Izzy off guard. She had expected denials, legal jargon, a deflection of blame. She had not expected accountability. The night of the gala. Arthur continued, his gaze drifting toward the window. "As I was falling, the last thing I thought was, what was it all for? All the deals, the rivals, the numbers going up. I have built an empire of things. Miss Rossy and I was about to die utterly alone in a room full of people." He looked back at her, his eyes holding hers. "You didn't just save my life. You gave me a question I can't answer. And then you walk in here, a ghost from a past I didn't even know I had, and refuse my money for a reason of principle. I find I am in desperate need of understanding people like you." Before Izzy could respond, the door opened and Benjamin Carter entered, holding a thin file. He stopped short, seeing Izzy, but Arthur waved him in. "Benjamin, good. You have it, Arthur." "Perhaps this can wait," the lawyer said, glancing nervously at Izzy. "No, it can't," Arthur insisted. He gestured to the file. "When I learned who you were, Miss Rossy, I asked Benjamin to look into the Billionaire acquisition more deeply, and to look into you, not to find leverage, but to understand." Benjamin reluctantly opened the file and handed a single sheet of paper to Arthur. It was a copy of Izzy's birth certificate. Arthur stared at it, his breathing becoming shallow. The heart monitor began to beep a little faster. "Mother's name," he read aloud, his voice cracking. "Sophia Rossy." He looked up at Izzy, his face a canvas of disbelief and dawning horror. "Your mother is Sophia Rossy." "Yes," Izzy said, confused by his reaction. "How do you—" Arthur's hand trembled as he reached into the drawer of his bedside table. He fumbled for a moment before pulling out a worn leather wallet. From a hidden compartment, he extracted a small, faded photograph, its corners softened with age. He held it out to her. Izzy took it hesitantly. The photograph was of a young man and a young woman standing on a sun-drenched pier. The man was unmistakably a young Arthur Parker. His hair darker, his face unlined, a genuine, unguarded smile on his lips. The woman beside him, her head resting on his shoulder, was radiant. She had a cascade of dark curls and a laugh that seemed to echo from the old photograph itself. Izzy's breath hitched in her throat. She knew that face as well as her own. It was her mother, Sophia. The room fell silent save for the frantic, accelerating beep of the heart monitor. Izzy looked from the photograph of the happy young woman to the broken old man in the bed, and then she thought of the mother she had just left in the hospice, lost in a fog of memory. The pieces of a puzzle she never knew existed began to slam into place with a devastating, impossible force. The story her mother sometimes whispered about a man who smelled of the sea. The fact that she never ever spoke of Izzy's father. Arthur Parker, the billionaire, whose life she had saved the corporate titan, whose company had destroyed her mother's health, was looking at her as if he were seeing a ghost. "Sophia," he whispered, his voice choked with a grief that was 26 years old. "I looked for her. For years. She just disappeared." He looked at Izzy, his eyes wide with a question he was too terrified to ask. "Your father. She never told you about him." "She never told me anything," Izzy whispered back, her world tilting on its axis. "I don't have a father." The beeping of the monitor became a shrill, steady alarm as Arthur Parker, for the second time in a week, stared into the face of a truth his heart could barely withstand. He was looking at his daughter. The shrill alarm of the heart monitor jolted the room into action. A nurse rushed in, her face a mask of concern. "Mr. Parker, your heart rate is dangerously high." "Sir, you need to calm down." "I'm fine," Arthur rasped, waving her away. His eyes never leaving Izzy's face. "Leave us." The nurse hesitated, glancing at the frantic numbers on the screen, but the raw authority in his voice was undeniable. She backed out, closing the door softly. The silence that returned was heavier, more profound than before. It was filled with the weight of unspoken history, of a life that had been fractured and a connection that had been denied. Izzy sank into the chair she had previously refused, the faded photograph still clutched in her trembling hand. The smiling woman on the pier and the frail, lost woman in the hospice were two halves of a life torn apart. And this man, this powerful, broken stranger, was the missing link. "Tell me," Izzy said, her voice barely audible. "Tell me everything." And so the story came pouring out of Arthur Parker, a confession that had been dammed up for more than a quarter of a century. He spoke of a summer in Montauk, long before he was a titan of industry. He was just Arthur, then a young man with ambition, but also with a heart that was still his own. He was working a summer job on the docks, trying to escape the suffocating expectations of his own domineering father, a ruthless patriarch who had built the first iteration of the Parker fortune. Sophia Rossy was a local artist working as a waitress to make ends meet. She was full of life fire and a joyful spirit that was the antithesis of his cold, calculated world. They fell in love hard and fast, in a whirlwind of bonfires on the beach and stolen moments on the pier. He told her about his dreams. She showed him how to see the color and beauty in the world. For 3 months, he was truly happy. "I was going to leave it all behind for her," Arthur said, his voice thick with regret. "The company, my inheritance, my father's approval. I was going to ask her to marry me. But his father, William Parker, found out. He saw Sophia as a threat, a commoner who would dilute the family's power and distract his heir. He confronted Arthur, giving him an ultimatum: end it with the girl, or be cut off, completely disowned, and left with nothing. Arthur, young and foolishly believing he could reason with his father, refused. That was when William Parker played his cruelest card. He intercepted a letter Arthur had written to Sophia, and he forged a reply. A brutal, cold letter supposedly from Sophia, saying she had met someone else, that their summer romance was just that, a fling. It said she wanted nothing more to do with him. Crushed and humiliated, believing the woman he loved had betrayed him. Arthur returned to New York, threw himself into the family business, and walled off his heart forever. He became the ruthless man the world knew, a man built on the foundation of a single devastating lie. "I never stopped looking for her," he whispered, tears tracing pathways through the lines on his face. "I hired private investigators years later after my father died. But she had vanished. It was as if Sophia Rossy never existed. Now he knew why. She had been hiding, protecting her child from the family that had so cruelly cast her aside. The pieces clicked together for Izzy. Her mother's deep-seated sadness, her fierce independence, her refusal to ever speak of the past. It wasn't bitterness, it was a shield. And Billionaire Labs. Izzy asked the final, painful piece of the puzzle. Arthur's face contorted in a fresh wave of agony. After my father's death, I learned the full extent of his manipulations in business, the lives he'd ruined. I created a silent investment arm, a way to fund projects I thought could do some good to atone for his sins. I was drawn to Billionaire because their lead researcher was working on a cure for a rare neurological condition, the same one my mother, William's wife, had suffered from. I funded them to try and cure the disease that took my own mother, never knowing, never imagining that their work would one day be used on Sophia. The irony was staggering, a tragedy of Greek proportions. In trying to atone for the sins of his father, he had inadvertently visited a new one upon the only woman he had ever loved. He wasn't a monster. He was a man trapped in a story written by a ghost. Their shared moment of raw, painful discovery was interrupted by the hushed vibration of Benjamin Carter's phone. He glanced at the screen, his face darkening. "Arthur, I apologize for the interruption, but you need to see this." The lawyer said, his voice grim. He handed the phone to Arthur. It was an article from a notorious financial gossip blog published just minutes ago. The headline screamed, "Parker's heir, apparent Carter. Parker in secret talks with Reed. Dynamics for hostile takeover. Sources claim Arthur Parker's health is gravely compromised." The article detailed how Arthur's nephew Carter, believing his uncle to be incapacitated and his reputation damaged, had made a secret pact with Donovan Reed. They planned to leak damaging information about Parker Innovations, including a heavily spun version of the failed Waitress drug trial, to drive the stock price into the ground. Then, with backing from Reed, Carter would lead a shareholder revolt and seize control of the company, carving it up between them. The betrayal was swift and absolute. While Arthur was fighting for his life and confronting the ghosts of his past, the jackals were circling, ready to tear his life's work to shreds. His own blood, his nephew was leading the charge. Arthur looked from the phone to Izzy. He saw not just the daughter he never knew, but the only person in the world he could now trust. The weariness in his eyes was replaced by a familiar cold fire. They had tried to bury him. They had mistaken his moment of vulnerability for weakness. They had no idea who they were dealing with. And they had no idea that the Parker dynasty, which they thought was ending, had just found its true heir. The news of Carter Parker's treachery acted like a powerful stimulant. The frail, reflective man in the hospital bed vanished, and in his place was the formidable strategist who had built an empire. The battle for his company was a language Arthur understood perfectly, and he would not lose. Not now. Not when he had just found something worth fighting for, beyond balance sheets and stock prices. Benjamin Arthur said, his voice resonating with its old command. "Call an emergency board meeting. Remote access. I'll attend from here. And get me our head of communications, Jennifer. Now." Over the next few hours, Izzy watched in awe as her father, a man she had just met, dismantled his enemies with surgical precision. He worked the phone like a conductor, his weak voice growing stronger with every decisive command. He leveraged his relationships with loyal board members, preempted Carter's moves, and strategized with his legal team. He was a general marshalling his forces for war. But his masterstroke was not a financial one. It was a human one. "Jennifer," he said to his communications chief over the speakerphone, "cancel the press release about my health. We're holding a full press conference tomorrow morning, and I won't be the only one speaking." He looked directly at Izzy. "Dad? Arthur? I don't know what to call you, Izzy," began, her head spinning. "I can't. I'm not a part of your world. You are the only part of my world that matters anymore," he said, his voice softening. "Carter and Reed are trying to use your mother's tragedy as a weapon against me. They want to paint Parker Innovations as a villain. The only way to fight a lie is with the truth. Our truth." The press conference was a media circus. It was held in the hospital's auditorium, packed with reporters and television crews, all expecting to hear a story of corporate backstabbing and a CEO's failing health. They got something entirely different. Arthur Parker appeared via a live video feed from his hospital room. He looked tired, but resolute. He began by acknowledging the hostile takeover attempt, confirming the rumors of his nephew's betrayal. He laid out with brutal clarity how he had already checkmated their moves, securing the board's loyalty and protecting the company's assets. Donovan Reed and Carter Parker were finished before they had even begun. Then the story shifted. But this attack on my company was predicated on a lie, Arthur announced, his voice echoing through the stunned auditorium. A lie concerning a company called Waitress Labs, and the tragic failure of one of its clinical trials. To tell the truth about that, I need to introduce you to someone. The camera feed switched to a second screen. On it was Isabelle Rossy, seated not in the auditorium, but in a quiet, comfortable room. Beside her, propped up on pillows and looking more lucid than she had in months. Thanks to a new team of specialists Arthur had flown in overnight, was her mother, Sophia. Izzy, her voice clear and steady, told her story. Not as a victim, but as a daughter. She spoke of her mother's illness, her own abandoned dream of being a doctor, and the devastating impact of the failed drug trial. The reporters listened captivated. This was the human cost Carter and Reed had planned to exploit. Then Arthur came back on screen. What the men who tried to destroy my company didn't know, he said, his voice thick with emotion, is that the woman whose suffering they sought to use for their own gain Sophia Rossy is the great love of my life. And the brave young woman who saved my life at the gala, the woman they tried to buy and manipulate, Isabelle Rossy, is my daughter. A tidal wave of shock rolled through the room. The story was no longer about a corporate takeover. It was a saga of lost love, a secret child, and a stunning reunion. Arthur went on to announce the creation of the Sophia Rossy Foundation, endowed with a colossal $5 billion from his personal fortune. Its mission was twofold: to provide the best possible care for all patients negatively affected by the Waitress trial, and to fund transparent, ethical, and groundbreaking research into neurological disorders. And he announced its future head. "The foundation will be led," he declared, looking straight into the camera, by its new chief medical advisor upon her graduation from Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, which she will be attending on a full scholarship. My daughter, Dr. Isabelle Rossy Parker. In the aftermath, the Parker empire was not just saved, it was reborn. Carter was exiled from the company and the family, a pariah in the world he so desperately wanted to conquer. Donovan Reed's reputation was shattered, his predatory tactics exposed to the world. Izzy's life transformed, but not into the empty existence of a socialite she might have feared. Her days became a blend of the old and the new. She spent precious, lucid hours with her mother, whose condition was now managed by the world's best doctors, bringing a measure of peace and comfort to her final chapter. She also spent time with her father, the two of them tentatively, awkwardly, building a bridge across 26 years of silence. They were stranger with a shared history, finding their way back to each other, one conversation at a time. True to his word, Arthur funded her return to medical school. She wasn't just a student anymore. She was a woman with a mission. The apathetic, invisible waitress was gone, replaced by a future leader in medicine driven by a deep personal purpose. She would wield the power and resources of the Parker name, not for profit or prestige, but to heal, to fix what was broken, and to ensure no one else suffered the way her mother had. Her brave move at the gala hadn't just saved one man's life. It had redeemed his soul, righted a historic wrong, and set her on a path to save thousands more. The collapse of the Billionaire was not an end, but a beginning for them both. And so a single moment of chaos in a glittering ballroom became a story of redemption, reunion, and rebirth. Isabelle Rossy. The invisible waitress proved that true power isn't measured in dollars, but in courage and compassion. Arthur Parker, the lonely king in his corporate castle, found that the greatest treasure he ever possessed was the daughter he never knew he had. Their story reminds us that beneath the surface of our ordinary lives, extraordinary connections are waiting to be found, and that a single act of bravery can change everything. It shows that even the most broken families can find a way to heal, and that our greatest tragedies can sometimes lead us to our true purpose. If this story of courage and destiny moved you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder that heroes are all around us. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you won't miss our next incredible real-life story. What did you find most shocking about this story? Let us know in the comments below.